Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, May 26, 1967.
The Beatles Come to America. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Welcome to the Beatles Come to America podcast, and I am your host, Tom Gouker, along with the Beatle Guru Brooke Halpin. What does the summer of love smell like? I don't know about that, but I can tell you what it sounds like, and it's right here on this album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which was released May 26, 1967. It's cool that this album is the unofficial soundtrack of the modern social revolution. Since Capitol Records stopped chopping up the records, the podcast will just be a little longer, more songs, and more to chat about. Before we get into this landmark album, we do have some housekeeping notes to get through. I have a podcast, and it's called Something Came from Baltimore, which is a music interview podcast. Has more jazz and R&B than blues, and it's not really about Baltimore, but we want you to subscribe. The link is in the show notes, and we want you to be a part of that Be More Music scene. The Beatle Guru Brooke Halpin is also all-knowing when it comes to the Beatles, and he sweats that Beatle DNA. Follow him on his Facebook page, Come Together with the Beatles and Brooke Halpin. The link is in the show notes also. We also have a Facebook page called The Beatles Come to America, and what we're asking you to do is rank the best albums to the worst. It's a lot harder than you think. And as a bonus, at the end of every episode of The Beatles Come to America, we have a Brooke Halpin original song, so you'll want to stay for that. We hope you subscribe, participate, and enjoy. Just remember, we love the Beatles, so love us in the comments. Enjoy our other creative projects. Now, they've been going in and out of style, but they're guaranteed to raise a smile. Let's start the interview. It's The Beatles Come to America, Episode 12. The Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Okay, so on the phone today, we have the one and only, the Beatle Guru, Brooke Halpin, and it's The Beatles Come to America. It's a part of the Something Came from Baltimore series. Welcome, Brooke, to The Beatles Come to America.
Well, thank you, Tom. It's always great to be with you. Oh, my God. This album, and by the way, I'm holding the original copy that I got in 1967. I must admit that it is a bit tattered. I mean, first of all, you look at the cover and you go, what the hell is going on now? We haven't heard from the lads in almost a year, coming off Revolver in August of 66. And then they come out with this album. And when you look at the cover, there's 8 Beatles on the cover. What is that all about? Well, there's the wax figure of the earlier Beatles when they were the mop tops. And then you have them dressed up in their day-glow uniforms. And that's the Sergeant. Now they're Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. So it's a band within the band. This is not the Beatles, okay? I mean, we know it's the Beatles. But they created an alter ego, if you will. And they became another band. And they said they wanted to do it so that they would have the freedom to do whatever they wanted to do in the recording studio. They were no longer touring. And they didn't have to think about, well, gee whiz, we're going to have to play these songs live. Nope. No more live performances. It gave them an incredible amount of freedom just because of that, and they indulged in it with this album. This album cover, as I'm looking at it right now, there are 71 images of people on this album cover. This was an absolute friggin' nightmare for Brian Epstein because he had to get clearances for using the likeness of all these people's images. And, of course, some of the people were no longer with us. They had deceased. You know, I'm looking at Marilyn Monroe and Tom Mix and Laurel and Hardy and Edgar Allan Poe. So Stockhausen is on here. This is incredible. Mae West, as a matter of fact, she got the letter and she wrote a letter back and said, why would I want to be a member of a Lonely Hearts Club? So she didn't want to be included. And then they wrote back and said, oh, no, it's just the name of the band. It's not really a Lonely Hearts Club. And then you look at the bottom of the image below the big bass drum, and it has the Beatles on flowers, and then it looks like a bass guitar with like 3 or 4 strings in yellow flowers. And then you have Father Mackenzie, who's emerged. He's coming up from the dirt. Now, At the time, no one thought, oh gosh, what's Father McKenzie doing coming up from the dirt? Well, as the years went by and then people would start to analyze everything, people say, oh, well, you know what it is? It's a graveside. The Beatles are dead. That's why the four younger Beatles are looking down on the grave. You know, they're mourning, their faces are sad, and then you have the new band replacing the Beatles. I mean, all this interpretation was going on, not at the time, not in 67, but it certainly did create a lot of stir, and even to this very day, you know, there are some people who believe that this is a grave site, and that, you know, Paul McCartney was dead, and that Billy Shears took his place, and that's why if there's Billy Shears, you know, Billy Shears, and then all that kind of stuff. The other thing that is very interesting, that I thought was interesting even back in 67, if you look on the far right side of the album cover, it says, Welcome the Rolling Stones, and it says Good Guys. This is like a doll, a pretty large doll, female, you know, little girl doll. And it made sense because the Rolling Stones were actually, they attended the A Day in the Life recording session. Brian Jones, Keith Richards, and Mick Jagger were there. And they were also at the broadcast, at the worldwide broadcast when they did All You Need Is Love worldwide broadcast. So they were chums. John and Paul sang on one of the Rolling Stones songs back in the summer of 67, the song called We Love You. So anyhow, it's just fascinating to see the Welcome the Rolling Stones. In other words, there was no competition between the two bands. They were very charming. And then the question is, why is it a Lonely Hearts Club? Who's lonely? You know, these are the Beatles who, by the way, all these figures behind them, it's as if they are audience. If they're bringing the audience onto the album cover. For the first time, we see an audience, or you might say fans, but I think it's their audience. These are people that John and Paul picked out that they wanted on the cover. George only asked for 3 different gurus, and Ringo didn't really care. He didn't say anything. He said whatever they want to do. So the cover alone is like, okay, well, we're in for something quite different, ladies and gentlemen. And then you turn to the back cover, and all of the lyrics on the album are printed on the back, which I believe was the first. Interestingly enough, you have the 4 Beatles on the bottom, but Paul has his back toward us. We don't know why it's Paul's back. And then George Harrison is pointing to lyrics on the back. You can see his finger. He's pointed to Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock as the day begins. So this is another clue. This is another clue because that's when Paul McCartney died in the car crash. Is all this stuff, this album cover is loaded with all types of clues. And then you open up the cover, and inside you see a large photograph of the 4 Beatles. It looks like they're sitting down, at least Paul is anyway. And John and Paul look pretty good. George looks a little mysterious, and Ringo is rather expressionless. Doesn't have much of an expression. And they're all decked out. Paul's got a medal on, and there's an OPD patch on his, well, I guess that would be his left arm. And the people said, oh, he was officially pronounced dead. That's what that stood for and all this nonsense. And then you pull out the album, and the album is in a sleeve. I have it right here. I have the original sleeve. And it's like a psychedelic red, pink. It's a gradation of different shades from red to white. And it's like a swirling design. And then, of course, you got the Capitol Records LP inside, which I have right here. And then we put the record on. Oh, my God. All right, Tom. So are we ready to talk about each track now?
We always like to ask first, since you lived it, what was the first time that you heard Sgt. Pepper? And before we go into the tracks, just like what was your reaction?
Okay. It just so happened that the album was released in the U.S. on June 2nd. And that is the birthday of my girlfriend at the time. So I bought this for her birthday on June 2nd. It was released that day, and I was able to get it at the record shop. And we played it, and I believe that I had already heard some of the tracks on the radio. I'm quite sure that the 2 big radio stations in Hartford, Connecticut, were playing some of the tracks, if not all of the tracks. I do know that summer, that some radio stations, they played the entire album uninterrupted. Nobody would have done that. No one was doing that for any other band, but that's what they were doing. So I listened to it with Elaine, as my girlfriend at the time, and we were completely stunned and blown away and excited because we were hearing things that we never heard before. I mean, we knew the Revolver was innovative. This completely blew Revolver away. It's like, how in the hell can you outdo Revolver? But they did. They did with this album. What they did was they brought the audience, they brought the fans into the recording studio. That's why the album starts off with an audience. They put the audience on the cover because they were not touring anymore. So they wanted to do that, which is a brilliant idea. And it's a concept album. This is the first time that there is a cohesiveness that exists from track one to the final track of the LP. A friend of mine had one of the first stereos that came out, and he had the stereo version of this. And we were hearing things we'd never heard before because the voices would be moving from the right speaker to the center and then to the left speaker. And then when you got into something like Good Morning, you could actually hear the animals crossing, doing a crossfade from right to left. The degree of creativity on this LP, not to slight the creativity on preceding albums, especially Revolver and Rubber Soul, but this is a standalone, and this is Paul's baby. This is Paul's album. So I can tell you that when hearing it, everybody I knew the summer of 1967, that's all we played. Everybody played this album. The radio stations played this album. People were singing the songs everywhere I went. I went to Los Angeles the summer of 1967, and it's the same thing was happening in Los Angeles that was happening in Connecticut. As a matter of fact, Johnny Rivers released a song in 1967 called Summer Rain, and he actually says, all summer long we were dancing in the sand. Everybody just kept on playing Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. I mean, that's how real it was. It was so overwhelming that everybody, it was like a party. It was as if the Beatles had created a party, and we wanted to be part of the band. We were part of the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. But no one thought, oh, gee whiz, I don't want to be a member of a Lonely Hearts Club Band. Why didn't they call it Sgt. Pepper's Happy Hearts Club Band? Why is it a Lonely Hearts Club Band? Then you get into this whole thing about, well, why are they lonely? Oh, they're lonely because, well, Paul died in November of 1966. Or you could say that they were lonely because they no longer are performing in front of their audience. Anyhow, it was a phenomenal time, and this album was the album that dominated the airwaves and everyone's lives. The summer of 1967 didn't matter where you were in the world, especially in the U.S. and in the U.K. This was it. This was the most exciting thing that was going on. And, I mean, this album, it won like 4 Grammy Awards in 1968, which is crazy. I mean, that's how celebrated, as you said, this album is. It's unparalleled, absolutely unparalleled. And there's one thing that's like, okay, well, how did they come up with the title for the band? Do you know the story? Do you know the story, Tom?
Paul was looking at like the large names of like Big Brother's Holding Company or Quicksilver Messenger Service, and that they were really long. How he picked out Sgt. Pepper, I don't know.
Okay. Well, there's a couple of things. Oh, well, this is true. He went to Africa with Mal Evans in November. Why Paul went down to Africa with Mal Evans is a mystery. Again, there's some speculation that it was the new guy and they did plastic surgery on the new guy to make him look like Paul McCartney. Anyhow, when they flew back, they were on the plane and they were serving them lunch or dinner, and of course there were salt and pepper shakers in first class, of course. Paul looked at the salt and pepper shaker and Mal looked at it and said, oh, pepper. So we got salt, we got pepper. And supposedly Paul got the idea, oh, that's a great idea for the band, we'll call ourselves Sgt. Pepper. I don't know about that. What's interesting is that there was a band in Liverpool in 1964, right around, the whole Mersey Beat, Beatlemania, and it was a band called Billy and the Pepper Pots. So it's like, did Paul know about Billy and the Pepper Pots? I don't know. Maybe he did. And then again, there's like the connection, well, Billy and the Pepper Pots, and then we have Billy Shears and Sgt. Pepper. There's all these things, and then supposedly the guy who replaced Paul was William Campbell, and of course his first name is Billy, and then some people think that Billy Shears is just shorthand for William Shakespeare because John and Paul loved William Shakespeare. So how did they come up with the name? All I know is that Paul came up with it. Was it simply because of a salt and pepper shaker on a flight from Africa to London? Could be. That's what he says. That's what he claims.
Before we get into each track, I just want to give out just a little info on the album. It was 27 weeks in the number one in the UK, 15 weeks in the US. 2003, Rolling Stone voted it the number one album of all time. It's one of the best-selling albums, and as of 2011, it was at 32 million. Paul said it was the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds that inspired, but it was also the Mothers of Invention Freak Out album. George Martin felt that Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane was a big fail on his part not to include that onto the album. He felt that the themes of those two songs would have really worked out on this album, but
didn't need it. This album did not need those two songs. Absolutely not.
There's a high-pitched noise for dogs. I don't know if you're going to mention that. Paul, 700 hours in the studio, and if it would present-day cost, it would be $450,000, I'm going to say $500,000 to do this.
You have to listen to this album in its entirety because that's the way it was designed. If you don't do that, then you're missing out on the whole experience. The other thing is that in later days, Paul actually said that Sgt. Pepper is a drug album. And when we get into each track, we could talk about how that pertains.
Okay, so we're going to get right into this album. It is on side one. It's Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
Okay, well, as I mentioned earlier, straight away you hear an audience. That's something completely different. And again, I believe it was because, well, it says in the lyrics that they're putting on a show. Sit back and enjoy the show. So the new band, Sgt. Pepper, is in front of an audience. And the audience was everybody at home who bought the album and listened to it and listening to it on the radio. We became the audience. We became part of the experience. I mean, this is a brilliant idea. The marching band in the middle of it was based on a melody that Paul had that George Martin arranged. Very nice. The marching band element actually, when you look at the movie Help, there's a scene where the Beatles are dressed up in a marching band. I believe it's when they're in the Austrian Alps. So this marching band thing that's been kicking around, plus, of course, there's that brass band that occurs during, like, the party scene in Yellow Submarine, which had happened, the single, which came out in the summer of '66. So it's kind of like a continuation and an evolving use of the marching band. What's really nice is that the marching band is comprised of 4 French horns, by the way. Now, in this particular song, McCartney is playing lead guitar and bass, doing the lead vocal. We've got John on rhythm guitar and George on rhythm guitar, and they're both singing harmony. And then George Barnes playing the organ. This was a total surprise because we didn't know what would come after this first track. Well, next, of course, was this big build-up and introduction to someone by the name of Billy Shears. Now, who the hell is Billy Shears? Because we have Sgt. Pepper. That's one character. And by the way, when you bought the album back then, it came with a huge poster that was similar to the photos of them on the inside when you opened up the LP. And then it had cut-out figures that you could cut out, of, I believe, you had like Sgt. Pepper himself, with the big mustache. And there was a badge, the Sgt. Pepper badge, and then there was something that looked like the bass drum as well. So what's going on here is that, all right, well, who is Billy Shears? I guess Billy Shears is Ringo, because there's Ringo singing With a Little Help from My Friends. So we talk about With a Little Help from My Friends. Now, he actually says that he gets high with a little help from his friends. Now, this is the second track after the introduction. Well, getting high, of course, is about drugs. Now, someone could argue and say, well, getting high is about getting high on life, getting high on love. But the Beatles were definitely doing a lot of drugs at this time, and that's why they put those lyrics in. The song was written by Paul and John. It's one of the few songs that they actually wrote collaboratively on this LP. And Paul McCartney's bass playing on this album, and especially on this track, to me, is the best bass line I've ever heard in my entire life. It's syncopated, it bounces around, incredible melodic bass line. The tone of his bass, I don't know how the hell he did it. That combined with the sound of Ringo's drums. Remember, this was done on a 4-track machine. And the sound, you could go into a studio today with 64 tracks, and you couldn't get the sound that they got then. This was magic. These people, the Beatles and George Martin, were magicians, and they were creating magic. This album is total magic. George Harrison plays a really nice lead guitar parts on Help from My Friends, and to this day, it's one of the best songs in the Beatles catalog because it's very upbeat, and we get by with a little help from our friends. So going back to the summer of 1967, the period of the summer of love, we were very close with our friends. I mean, we saw our friends like almost every day back then. And there was this sense of unprecedented camaraderie between our friends. So this song was a perfect song for the times. Absolutely. And also the lyric is so irresistible. Do you believe in a love at first sight? Yes, I'm certain that it happens all the time. Oh, my God. You could not but yet fall in love with that type of lyric for the summer of love. This song was perfectly timed for the summer of 67.
The Sgt. Pepper song had great covers by Jimi Hendrix, Cheap Trick, and the Flaming Lips. As a part of the promotion of the Sgt. Pepper movie that came out in 1978, they released this song, the Sgt. Pepper with a Little Help from My Friends, as the A-side, and A Day in the Life as a B-side, as a single in the U.S., and it only hit number 71. But I do remember it on the radio. Joe Cocker made With a Little Help from My Friends like a big hit. With a Little Help from My Friends is 311 out of 500 of the greatest songs of all time. And that brings us to our next song.
Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Okay, John. John was doing LSD every day. He's doing LSD. Now, you probably know the story. Most people do. People say, oh, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds stands for LSD because it's a hallucinogenic drug. And when you look up in the sky and you're tripping on acid, you see all sorts of weird things flying around. So it's very logical, and it makes sense that that's why John called this Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. He's always denied it. Paul has denied it. Everybody denied. Ringo denies it because Julian came home from school and he did a drawing, and he said to this, when John asked him, oh, what's that? And Julian said, oh, it's Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. And that's the story that was inspired John. You can believe whatever you want to believe. You can believe both, perhaps. I think it might be both, personally. Okay, so we get into the music on this one. These lyrics are some of the most advanced. It's like poetry, these lyrics. They're so loaded with images, tangerine trees and marmalade skies and newspaper taxis and, things that you wouldn't think of for lyrics in a song. But John came up with these lyrics, and oh my God, Paul came up with the newspaper taxis. Got to give Paul credit for that line. But not only is it interesting lyrically, but musically. The verses are in 3/4 time. The meter is 3/4 time. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, river, 1, 2, 3, da, da, 1, 2, 3, 1. And then the chorus is 1, 2, 3, da, 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 da. So it goes from 3, 4 in the verse and the bridge, and then 4, 4 into the chorus. Yeah, John, as we talked about before, he liked using different time signatures, so this is another example of that. Also, harmonically, this is extremely advanced because, usually in a song, Tom, a song starts in a key signature, all right? If you're a guitar player, for example, the songs usually begin in E, or on a D chord, or on a G chord, or on a C chord, or on an A chord, usually, or an A minor or an E minor. Those are usually the chords. And whatever the first chord is in the song is usually, that means the song is in that key. And then you go from usually predictable chords. If you're playing E, you're going to go to an A, you're going to go to a B, you might go to an F sharp minor, and then you go back to an E. Not in this case. Then Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, there are 3 different key signatures. This is unheard of. Okay, it starts off the verse in A major, then the bridge is in B flat major, and then the chorus is in G. This is very, very advanced stuff. How the Beatles came up with it, I don't know. They had no musical training. And now it's possible that George Martin, was the musical genius in the background saying, hey, do the verse in A, do the bridge in B flat, and do the chorus in G. This is really, really very, very unusual advanced stuff that was going on. They did it. God bless them. And then, of course, we get down into the instrumentation on this. You've got John who does of course, the lead vocal, naturally, and the guitars. But then we have Paul who plays the bass line. Again, on this song, the bass on this whole album is off the charts. McCartney's bass playing on this album is unheard of. And it's the bass line that weaves us through all those different keys that I mentioned, through A and B flat and G. It's through his bass line, except there is that drum break that goes from the bridge into the chorus. That Ringo pounds off the boom, do, do. And then George Harrison, he's also playing a beautiful lead guitar. And he's also playing the droning tambura, so we have the Indian influence. And George Martin's on the piano. But that beautiful opening, I mean, it's like classical music that's going on. That's Paul playing that, by the way. His musicality is so phenomenal. Sometimes it's hard to fathom. So we went from, with a little help from my friends, into Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. And we're rolling into the second track on the album. And everybody is completely blown away. I wanted to add also the influence lyrically for Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds for John was that John loved the author Lewis Carroll, and he also loved Alice in Wonderland. So you can listen to the lyrics with Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland in mind. And you can hear the influence. I just wanted to mention that as well.
One thing I noticed is John's voice on this. I mean, what an idea to completely alter your sound and sound completely different. And this is wild. Like right now, if you listen to his vocal, you're like, it's a whole different person. And he does that a lot through this whole album.
Yes, because not only is John's voice changing, it's evolving in terms of how they're using not only his voice, but all of their voices in the recording studio now. Because the recording studio now it's their artistic laboratory, if you will. It really is. And they're using the recording studio as an instrument, really. That's what they're doing.
The next song is Getting Better, and just the notes on it is that, in my opinion, the guitar work from George is amazing. But Getting Better is, there's so many artists that have tried to nick that guitar sound through the years with Todd Rundgren and XTC and stuff. What's your thought of this song?
for getting better. The inspiration was, Jimmy Nicol was the drummer for a short period in '64 because Ringo was hospitalized. Jimmy's doing a gig with John, Paul, and George, and then at the end of the gig, Paul and sometimes John would go, "Hey, how's it going, mate? How you doing?" And Jimmy would say, "It's getting better, getting better." And that really was the seed in Paul's mind. He remembered that. And that supposedly was the inspiration for the title. Now, the lyrics are actually, in the verse, are quite negative. I used to be mean. I used to beat my woman. I was cruel. Not really good, not really upbeat lyrics. The music is extremely upbeat, but what they're doing is they're taking, man, I was mean, but I'm changing my scene. It's a transformation of someone who was bad, who was mean, who was cruel, and then on the chorus, it's like, but I got to admit, it's getting better. Yeah, it's getting better all the time. And then John goes, "It can't get no worse." Lyrically, this is very, very progressive. A very progressive song. Okay, so then we get into this, the bit with the instruments, as you were mentioning. It's almost piercing. It's like, dun, 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 dun. Very staccato. And what it is, it's a combination of piano and also a pianette. And George Martin's playing the pianette, and Paul's on the keyboard. And as you mentioned, the guitar work on is just superb. And it's a nice balanced collaboration between Paul's positiveness, and John actually admitted, later on that he was cruel to his women. That's why he wrote those lyrics. It's autobiographical. So, no one thought that John would be doing that back then. We all just thought he was, making up some lyrics for a new Beatles song. But unfortunately, that was the case with Mr. Lennon back in the early '60s. As an album track, I think it's perfect. It fits in, with the whole sound of the album. As I said earlier, you have to listen to the album in its entirety. And this is definitely a Paul song with obviously some input from John on the lyrics.
Their harmony's a little different too. Better, better, better.
Oh yeah, the melody on that part is fantastic. Yeah, better, better, better. Yeah. Oh, incredible stuff. The vocal arrangements. I don't know where these guys were pulling all this stuff from, but it was unbelievable stuff.
Fixing a Hole, where the rain gets in. So talk about Fixing a Hole.
Okay, Fixing a Hole, another Paul song. What's interesting about this one is that Fixing a Hole, some people, again, Paul admitted, he said this is a drug album. Fixing a Hole can easily be interpreted as shooting up heroin, fixing a hole. Now, did Paul do heroin? No, he never did any heroin. But is this song about heroin? I don't think so. Anyhow, I just wanted to get that out there. This song is really quite fascinating because it's something that happened during Paul's life at the time. He had his home in London, and there would be fans outside all the time. And when he wrote the lyrics, see the people standing there who disagree and never win and wonder why they don't get in my door. It's about the fans. What does that have to do with fixing a hole? Absolutely nothing. So, and then we get into the other lyrics. It really doesn't matter if I'm wrong, I'm right, we're right along. That gets a little into the whole Zen mode of thinking, is that, it is what it is, I am where I am, it's all in the now, and it's not a matter of right or wrong. It's just the reality of is. This is how it is. And that was that type of a philosophy, again, fits in very nicely with the Summer of Love. We've got two harpsichords on this song, by the way. We've got Paul on the harpsichord and bass, and we have George Martin on the harpsichord. George Harrison plays two lead guitar parts, and they are breathtakingly gorgeous. The guitar work that George does on this track is just phenomenal. Background vocals, he doesn't really do that much. He's not much on this track. And the other thing I wanted to say about this one, the day that Paul was going to leave his home to go to the session, someone came up to his door, and Paul said, "Hello, who are you?" And the guy said, "I'm Jesus." Paul thought, well, you know what? He just might be. You never know. So he said, would you like to come to the recording studio with me? And so Jesus said yes, and Paul said, as long as you're quiet, you can come. So he brings this total stranger. I guess the guy must have had a long beard and long hair, looked like Jesus, I guess. He brought him to the recording session, a total stranger. And John and George and Ringo and George Martin, like, what's going on here? And Paul's like, oh, that's Jesus. I thought I'd bring him into the session. This is very, very funny. But this is the kind of shit that was going around, happening back then. And, of course, Paul was, Mr. Pothead at the time. And I think at this point, he had also taken acid as well. So there's so many drugs floating around that, you never know. He didn't want to take a chance and think that if it was Jesus, he didn't want to insult him. Very, very funny story. But lyrically, this song is kind of all over the place. I'm fixing the hole where the rain gets in. It stops my mind from wandering. I'm filling a crack, etc., etc. I don't quite get how the verses tie in with the rest of the song. But anyhow, the sound of the song is very unusual. It's not rock and roll. You could call it kind of classical meets pop, is what I would call it. But a great song, nonetheless, on the Sgt. Pepper album.
I love that Jesus story. Never heard that one before.
Yeah.
It's great. Yeah, Paul said that most of these songs are pot related, and that was one of them. She's Living Home is just John and Paul. There is no other Beatle on there. I love Paul's background vocals on this.
His background, he's the lead vocal, Paul.
Yeah, but when he goes, fun, like it's very Beach Boys.
Are you still there?
Is leaving.
Oh, yeah.
Fun.
Yeah, that's John. Yeah. That's Paul and John together on the chorus. Yeah,
it's awesome. It just gives me chills when I hear it. Something they've never did before. The story is amazing, and you can talk about the song. Fun is the one thing that money can't buy. Is that not just a lyric for that generation and that time period?
Oh, absolutely.
What a mantra for that time period. It is number 5 of the best songs of all time from Time Out in London, believe it or not. They said it's a masterpiece.
Okay, She's Leaving Home. What was that lyric you said earlier, Tom? Money is the one thing that money can't buy. What is it?
Fun is the one thing that money can't buy.
Fun is the one thing that money can't buy. If you remember back to 1964, they were saying you can't buy love with money. And now, 3 years later, they're saying you can't buy fun with money. Kind of interesting, because even those lyrics are evolving. This is a Paul song. John did... he worked on the chorus with Paul. But this is predominantly another Paul song. This is a classical song. It has nothing to do with pop, nothing to do with rock. It's classical. This is a song that, maybe Schubert could have written, for example. There's no George on the track. There's no Ringo on the track. So it's predominantly Paul with a string orchestra, which includes, the double bass, stand-up bass, and a harp, and the harp is played by Sheila Bromberg. She is the first female musician to play on a Beatle record. I'm not talking about some of the string players that played on Eleanor Rigby, but as the first solo female to play on a Beatles record. Of course, she didn't get any credit. Now, this arrangement was done originally by Mike Leander, who was a prominent arranger in London at the time, because George Martin was busy working on something else, and Paul, he couldn't wait. He wanted to get this done. George Martin was offended. He was really offended that Paul could not wait. But that's what Paul did, and then after Leander did the arrangement, he brought it to George Martin, and George did make a few changes. Not a lot, but he did make some changes. So it's a masterpiece. And this is a perfect example of the freedom that they had to record something that they didn't have to think about, oh, you know what, we have to perform this as a Beatle band. No. But for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, it fit in perfectly, because this is another aspect of the new band, of the Pepper Band. It's a continuation of Paul writing stuff like Eleanor Rigby. So you go from Eleanor Rigby and you go to She's Leaving Home, obviously two very different songs. But in terms of a genre or an idiom, they're not that far apart. And yes, I know about the Melanie story, and they were reading the newspapers every day, and they would, read different things, and they would pull different things from what was going on in the newspaper. Paul denied it, but it's about a girl growing up. It's about her growing up and leaving home. Why is she leaving home? To be free. And again, just in terms of the societal evolution of what was going on with the kids and the teenagers at the time, we all wanted to grow up. We didn't want to be living at home with mom and dad anymore. We wanted to leave home, and some of us did. A lot of kids left home the summer of 1967. Where did they go? They went to Hyde-Asbury in San Francisco. They all went to San Francisco. They left home. So again, in terms of what they're saying about leaving home to be free, fit in perfectly for the summer of love.
Yeah, it's also it's a weird contradiction, because it's about a generational gap where the parents are square and the kids just got to be who they are, but the music is classical, and it's not rebellious at all. It's completely the opposite. It's a weird comparison between the two. It's their biggest rebellion song ever, and it's done to a classical performance.
That's a very good point, Tom, because in that sense it doesn't make any sense at all. But there's a somberness, there's a sadness about why I think they went with the string orchestra, because the string orchestra, as you were just saying, represents who? It represents the parents who say, what did we do that was wrong? She left a note behind. We struggled all of our lives to get by. And so the string orchestra is for the parents. That's what the string orchestra is all about.
For an album cut, it's mind-blowing. It's just a mind-blowing song. And it gets to the next one that's equally mind-blowing. Fantastic song to listen to with a headset on is the Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. It's just all about a poster that John bought while they were making Penny Lane. He just bought it and kind of rips a lot of the stuff off. But what I think is fun is that George Martin plays the piano, the harmonium, the Lowry organ, the Wurlitzer organ, the Hammond organ, and the glockenspiel, and tape loops on this song.
Yeah.
So how about that for being involved? And what you get is something pretty special. Can you talk about this song?
Yeah, well, this song is total psychedelia meets a turn-of-the-century carnival. So we have the carnival atmosphere, absolutely, with all of these organs and keyboards and glockenspiel that you mentioned going on. And this Mr. Kite is another, we know that he's from the poster. Okay, I get all that. I know that John got the 19th Century Circus poster, and Mr. Kite was on the poster. But Mr. Kite is also part of the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band show. He's another character in the show. So just to go through this, we have Billy Shears as a character. Of course, we have Sgt. Pepper, number one, the main character, the leader of the band. Then we have Billy Shears, who's a character in the band. He's in the band. Then we have Lucy in the sky. We have the magical Lucy. She's in the band. And now we have Mr. Kite, and he's another character in the band. So this is another aspect of Mr. Kite being part of the Pepper show. He's another character in the band. And it's perfect. I mean, it just fits in perfectly to the overall concept of the album. You can feel the carnival atmosphere. I mean, just by listening to it, with all the keyboards and the organs and the calliope, it takes you to another place, unlike the other places on the album. Lucy in the Sky took you into the psychedelic world of hallucinogenic drugs. I mean, absolutely. That's what those lyrics to me represent. She's leaving home, takes you to a sad place, where the parents are, and they're upset about losing their daughter because, they work so hard, and yet all she's doing is leaving a note, and she has broken their heart. that's a whole completely different place. And now we go to this carnival atmosphere. It's also the middle section. Anybody hearing this for the first time, you're hearing, it's like an orgy of sounds which you cannot identify, that you are completely captivated with, fascinated with. You don't know what the hell is going on. And this was during the waltz part. And again, Mr. John going from the song is in 4/4, and then when he says, and of course, Henry the horse dances the waltz, 2, 3, boom, ba, ba. It goes into the 3/4 time for the waltz, naturally, which only makes sense. What happened was, George Martin knew that John really wanted something very out there in terms of sort of a randomness almost to create, again, orgy of sounds. It's as if you're walking through a carnival park and you're hearing simultaneously, you'll hear the sound of the Ferris wheel, at the same time of the carousel, the merry-go-round, the same time as another ride or two going on simultaneously. So George Martin told Jeff Emmerich, just take a bunch of tapes that had organs on them and keyboards on them and harmoniums on them. Just cut them up into small pieces and shake them up in the bag and dump them out on the floor and just tape them together randomly. Now, what the hell was that? This ties into, you're getting into the avant-garde now. You're getting into stuff like, John Cage, and you're getting into some advanced contemporary composers who were doing things like that. And here's George Martin and the Beatles doing it. And the effect is unheard of. It's phenomenal. There's a lot of harmonicas on this track, Tom. I mean, you've got, by the way, John also made some tape loops, but George, for instance, plays the harmonica. McCartney is playing a lead guitar on this song. I don't know if people know that or not. And of course, the bass. And then Mal Evans plays the harmonica. And then Ringo plays the harmonica. And then Neil Aspinall, one of the Beatles managers, plays the harmonica. So there's tons of harmonicas, more harmonicas on this song than in any other song in the Beatles repertoire. It's a magical song to this very day, and it's a perfect song to go on the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album.
That's a lot of harmonicas.
That's a lot of harmonicas.
George was working with Only a Northern Song, and they discarded it for this song. And looking at Only a Northern Song, I have no idea why they would think that would fit on this album in the way it does. Within You, Without You is not my favorite song. I think it just goes on a little too long.
We were talking about the space between us all and the people who hide themselves behind a wall of illusion and never glimpse the truth. We just ended side one with the carnival psychedelic mysticade, and now we go to India with George Harrison. This is Indian classical music. There's no John, there's no Paul, there's no Ringo. This is a masterpiece as far as I'm concerned. It was right for the right time, for the summer of love again. These songs, I tell you, Tom, these songs resonated with millions of fans and teenagers, and this song was definitely one of them because it's about universal love. Not only was George singing about, he's saying that with our love we could save the world if they only knew. And the time will come where you'll see we're all one and life goes on within you and without you. This created a whole movement within the Beatle movement. People were wearing Indian clothing the summer of 1967. They were wearing the madras clothing. The girls were wearing the long madras dresses, and men and women were wearing beads. It was a whole movement that came out of George Harrison, him and his further involvement with Indian music and bringing it to the forefront. That's exactly what he did with his song. He said, without saying it, this is where it's at, boys and girls. This is the Indian classical music, and this is the Indian culture, and I'm giving it to you. And he engaged the listener, and he's asking the listener, are you one of them, about hiding behind the wall of illusion? He's saying, see beyond yourself, and you may find peace of mind is waiting there. I mean, these are very, very profound lyrics for a rock and roll guy. George had evolved so much because of his love and experience spending 6 weeks with Ravi Shankar in India in November of '66 to try and master the sitar. I am so glad that this track is on the album. This Sgt. Pepper album would not be what it is without Within You, Without You. And it's his only track on the album. Now, the previous album, as you know, as we talked about, George had 3 songs on Revolver. He went from 3 songs to 1, but oh my God, what a song. And he didn't have anything else ready to go. You mentioned correctly that they had recorded a Northern song, but they didn't want that on this album. The Indian culture and this Indian music piece is part of the new band. And that's pretty heavy for John and Paul, because that's what they're doing, especially Paul. This is Paul's record. You know, so for Paul to do this, okay, well, so, you know, all right, George, you know, you got the song, and, you know, so they're Within You, Without You is part of Pepper. It's part of the Pepper band. Pretty amazing, you know, because McCartney pretty much had control over this record. There's 8 violins and there's 3 cellos. And under George Harrison's direction, George worked with George Martin to have the dialogue going on between the sitar and the string instrumental in the middle of the song. The meter of the song is something that we're not familiar with because it's an Indian meter. It's more like 7/4 time. Most people don't know what 7/4 time. That's 7 beats per measure instead of 4/4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They're very unusual. The 7 is an odd number, and I love this track. The other thing that I should mention is that the dialogue and again, the string arrangement that goes on, the strings are actually, it's called glissando or glissandi, where they're sliding up and down, which ties in with what? The way that George Harrison bends the notes on the sitar. All this kind of meow. And it's brilliant the way the synthesis of Western instruments with East. This is the perfect example of East and West meeting each other in a musical composition. First time, no one had ever done this before, other than what George did with Love You Too on Revolver, but not to this extent, because on Love You Too we had, you know, fuzz guitar and we had other things going on. This is the first time that any band had combined predominantly Indian classical music with strings, with violins and cellos. God bless you, Mr. Harrison.
The next song is When I'm 64, and John had mentioned that this song was written, bones of it were written during the Cavern days, so they've been sitting on this one for a while. It had a hit by Kenny Ball and the Jazzmen. It was released as a single in 1967. In UK, it hit number 43. There are other, John Denver and Cliff Richards also recorded it.
Now this, to me, even though this was the first song, by the way, recorded for the Pepper album, but they didn't even know it was the Pepper album at the time, which is interesting. Yeah, they recorded this in early December of '66. Now, the supposed story, which I mentioned earlier, is that Paul came up with the concept for the album in November of '66, and now supposedly they recorded this one not knowing what the next album was going to be. So there's all these, there's a lot of gray areas going on here. This song could have been on Revolver. This song would have worked on Revolver. Does it work on Pepper? It works on Pepper because it's on Pepper. But is it like all these other character songs on Pepper? No, it's not. The connection I make with this song is She's Leaving Home. There's a connection between She's Leaving Home and When I'm 64. Because it's about, obviously, being older. So in a way, Paul wrote both songs. So he's addressing and he's speaking to the parents out there, the moms and dads. That's the connection that I can make. Other than that, character-wise, it could have been something different. It could have been another, if he came up with, some, at that time, because he was always writing stuff. I'm trying to think now, like, for instance, on Magical Mystery Tour, which would be the next one. The Fool on the Hill. Now, there is a good example. The Fool on the Hill is a character. That, to me, would have been a better choice than When I'm 64. I know I'm probably pissing off a lot of people, but it's just my thought, it's just my opinion, and no one has to agree with me, of course. It's just a thought. There's nothing wrong with When I'm 64. It's just that when you look at the album and how it's a concept album, I just wish it was about a character, and that's why I thought, a character would be the Fool on the Hill, which I thought would work in beautifully. This is a total Paul song. I mean, he's playing the piano, he's playing the bass. Ringo plays he plays some great cymbal work. He overdubbed just all this cymbal work. If you listen carefully toward the last verse, it's incredible that he does. And he plays the tubular bells, and then George Martin did the 2 clarinets and 1 bass clarinet. John supposedly plays lead guitar. There is lead guitar, but it only happens during the last verse. So there's very, very little John on this track, which would make sense because this is one of those songs that John would call a granny song. And he didn't like, John didn't like these songs. So I'm surprised that he even played any guitar at all on this one. And George and John, though, they do beautiful background vocals, though. Really nice background vocals, similar to the background vocals that they did on Coming Up on Magical Mystery Tour, similar vocals to Your Mother Should Know, another Paul song.
Our next song is Lovely Rita. I really love the John intro, and to me the outro of the song seems like overtly sexual with them groaning, John and Paul. I think it's pretty wild. It matches the lyrics, but it doesn't at the same time. Like, it seems like it's taking those lyrics about like sexual frustration and kind of just going in a different direction. Lot of comb and tissue going on.
Yeah, that kind of, you could hear it there. They do that every now and then. Yeah.
Fats Domino, Easy Star, Lonely Hearts Dub Band all did covers on it.
This is a perfect example of another character in Pepper's band, and this character happens to be Lovely Rita. This is so perfect for this album, not only because now we have another character in the band, but the way that the song is produced is part of the magical, psychedelic, hallucinogenic. You see, that was the thing about When I'm 64, too, is that When I'm 64 is a clean, compared to all the other songs on this record, it's very clean. You know what I'm saying? The production is clean. There's not all this production and swirling and effects going on. Lovely Rita, hello. It's like, wow, listen to this. The sound of the band is phenomenal. And yes, Paul got a parking ticket, and that was supposedly the inspiration. I guess that would make sense. But, as you were saying, what they did was, there's the lyric. When he took her out and tried to win her, then he brought her home and nearly made it, sitting on a sofa with a sister or two, tried to win her over, and nearly made it. Back then you made it by making out, and making out means you were kissing and fooling around, and having a lot of fun with your girl. Plus, he's sitting on the sofa with a sister or two. He's sitting on the sofa with, maybe two girls. Ooh, well, that's exciting. So that's the connection. Say, well, what's all this moaning and groaning and the heavy breathing going on at the end of the song? That's what it's about. That's the connection. That's connected to the lyrics I just cited. It makes sense. And they're having so much fun on this recording. Oh, my God. They're having a total blast. You can hear it. I'm surprised that they weren't laughing when they were doing the moaning and breathing and the groaning. But anyhow, the sound effects are over the top almost. They're all doing this comb and tissue paper with that zip kind of sound. Who the hell was doing that? Nobody. Again, innovation. These guys are just so creative. And again, they're in the studio now, and they don't have to worry about rushing out, play a concert in Manchester, England, or get on a plane and perform somewhere in Europe or the U.S. So they're indulging, and boy, I'm glad they did. This is another magical track. To me, it's a showpiece. It's a show number. It's a show number in Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It's akin to Mr. Kite in a way, even though Paul predominantly wrote Lovely Rita and John wrote Mr. Kite. In terms of production and in terms of concept for the album, oh my God, it's just absolutely perfect. And it takes you away because you don't anticipate the ending. And it's just kind of rambling on with the banging piano, the heavy breathing. You don't really know where it's going to go. And then finally you hear this rundown on the keyboards, and then John says, "Leave it." And that's how it ends. It's a very strange ending, but it works. And I love it. Oh, and by the way, Paul McCartney's bass line, oh, gee whiz, oh my God. This guy is such a monster. Let's listen to that bass on the whole record, but boy, especially on this track. And then George Martin, plays that incredible piano solo. It's kind of like a rolling, old-timey piano solo, which is so George Martin, obviously he had his hands, as you said earlier, he had a lot to do with Mr. Kite, and let's face it, he had a lot to do with this entire album. This is one of my favorite tracks on Pepper.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And, it's funny because it's very modern now. Like, it's way ahead of its time, and it still holds up as a really complex, cool track. And the same with Good Morning, Good Morning. That is just a take on the Kellogg's Cornflakes commercial in the morning.
Well, isn't it amazing, Tom, that someone is watching a TV commercial about Kellogg's Cornflakes, and this is the result of it? Now, who else in the world would be able to do something like that other than John Lennon? Sometimes it's almost incomprehensible to think of the degree and the level of creativity that these guys were working with, that they had, is just phenomenal. Just because of watching a TV commercial, we get this piece of music. And you want to talk about John changing time signatures? Oh, my God. This song is in 5/4 time, 5 beats instead of 4. Then it's in 4/4. Then it's in 3/4. Then it's in 2/4. I mean, this is like all over the place. Ringo was able to traverse all these time signatures. God bless him. It's not an easy thing to do. Yeah, of course, it starts because, well, in the morning, if you live on a farm, not living in downtown London or New York City, you might hear a rooster first thing in the morning. So that was clever and appropriate. Wanted brass. Now, this is interesting. We're getting into the Beatles using brass ensembles in their songs. We talked about how Paul used the brass on Revolver with Got to Get You Into My Life. Now, John's turn. The sound of the brass is extremely bright, the way it's produced. And it's almost biting. It's almost in your face. And Ringo's drumming on Good Morning is, if you zero in on the drumming, it's like, oh my God, what the hell is he doing? It's some of the best drumming Ringo's ever done. It really is. And then, the lead guitar solo, it's playing the lead guitar in this. It's Paul McCartney, and that guitar solo absolutely rips. It's one of the best guitar solos ever, I think, and it's Mr. Paul doing that. Yeah, I wanted to mention that this really is John giving us a portrait of a day in the life. You wake up in the morning, the rooster wakes you up, you go to work, you don't feel like going to work, you walk by the school you used to go to, you're flirting with the skirt, you go to see a movie, you hope she joins you, and then it's time, evening comes around, and it's time for tea and meet the wives. Even though I know that's from a TV show, but still it fits in. So this is like a miniature, this is like a day in the life. Lyrically, this is a day in the life, which is fascinating because we know we're going to be getting to that. And of course, John wrote both of these songs. So there is a connection between the two songs in terms of the title of A Day in the Life and the lyrics in Good Morning, Good Morning. Absolutely. The ending of the animals, and again, the stereo moving from right, and you can actually hear the animals chasing each other. And so they go from the right speaker and they move to the left speaker. I remember hearing that the first time at my friend's house, and it's hard to describe the first time. It's hard to put words to it. All you could do was play it repeatedly over and over again, and that's all we did. This album was played over and over all summer long. Everybody was playing it. It was impossible to play this album once because there was so much to listen to. It's a very dense album, production-wise, lyrically, musically.
The Sgt. Pepper's reprise. No brass on this, and it's a faster tempo. I'll be honest, I love this version a lot. I think it's funky. It's like a really cool rock song, and the only downside I have is I wish they would do a whole song of this. Like, this is it. Like, I love to hear this. It just goes away so fast, and it doesn't seem fair.
Yes, now we're getting close to the end. We're sorry, but we have to go. We're Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Yes. Now, what's curious about this is that this was Neil Aspinall's idea, by the way, and it's a brilliant idea. You would think it was Mr. Paul's idea, but no. Neil came up with this idea. This is the end of the show. We're sorry, but it's time to go. So then you think, okay, that's the end of the album. It starts with the audience. We hear Sgt. Pepper at the beginning, and now we're hearing it again. The Sgt. Pepper Band is saying, we hope you have enjoyed the show. We're sorry, but it's time to go. Goodbye. So that should be the end of the album. It ends with applause. The audience, the fans, the listeners. We loved it. All four Beatles, they all sang lead vocals on this bit, by the way. George supposedly plays lead guitar, but I think it's Paul. Sounds just like Paul, just like he played in the opening. What they could have done, you go from Good Morning, which I'd mentioned is a day in the life. The lyrics are a day in the life, what you do through the course of the day. Going to work, don't want to go. Walking around town, go to a show, you hope she goes, etc., etc. Go from Good Morning, and when you hear the animals going from right to left, it goes into John's acoustic guitar on A Day in the Life. Think about that. And then at the end of A Day in the Life, when it builds up the orchestra, with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And then you go to the Sgt. Pepper reprise, and it ends, and that's the end of the show, and that's the end of the album. How about that? Now, again, I know people are going to say, what the hell's the matter with this Brooke Halpin? What is this guy talking about? You can't do that. Well, I can do it. I have a, software program where I can move things around. I've tried it, actually. Sounds pretty amazing to me. But you understand what I'm saying in terms of a concept album. That would be the perfect, beginning and ending. You don't end the show and then, oh, gee, by the way, here's a whole other song. It doesn't make any sense if you're talking about a concept album. If you're just doing a bunch of songs like you did on Revolver, sure, doesn't matter. But if you're looking at the concept, that's what I say should have been done. How about that?
I can see that. I know that they have that dog noise after the piano break at the end, and then they have that weird outro that the UK has, where it's like gibberish for 30 seconds or so.
The gibberish, yeah.
But
that's not on the original album that I got in '67.
Oh no,
that's not on there.
It's not.
No.
But I'm just trying to figure out why they would do that. I'm fine with it. It doesn't diminish it. I just go back to the Sgt. Pepper reprise. Give me the full song. I want the full song because they're jamming and it's awesome.
Well, yeah, they are. They're cooking, but it's a reprise, so it's going to be brief. Yeah,
it's
I'm
disappointing.
sorry about that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, if you're going to change stuff, I'm going to change it too. I mean, I want the whole song.
Okay, so you're going to make that longer, and then I'm going to move some songs around at the end.
Yep, and then we have a perfect album. then it's perfect.
Okay.
Go ahead, give me a day in the life. What's your thought on a day in life?
Oh my God. This is drugs. You know the drug song. There's a couple of drug references. First of all, he blew his mind out in the car. You know, that was an expression when you blew your mind back in '67. That meant you were high. Oh, wow. Oh, man, you're blowing my mind. Oh, I blew my mind. That means you're having, these mind-expanding experiences. That's a complete drug reference, number one. Number two, Paul says that he had a smoke and then he went into a dream. Well, what do you think kind of smoke he had? He was smoking pot. That's the reference. When you smoke pot, you get into like a dream state. That's another drug reference. The 4,000 holes, I don't believe, although some people claim it is, I don't believe that's a drug reference. But the biggest drug reference is, I'd love to turn you on. Well, I'd love to turn you on again back in 1967. How did you turn people on? You turn them on by handing them a joint or giving them some drugs. That's what you did. And John and Paul knew that when they wrote that lyric, and it was a joke between them at the time because they knew that that's what it meant. So this song has those drug references. You got that beautiful acoustic guitar in the beginning. Paul's playing the piano and the bass. Ringo's drumming sounds like all of a sudden he's turned into a timpani player with the London Symphony Orchestra. How the hell he did that, I don't know. But you zero in on Ringo's drumming on A Day in the Life during the verses, and it almost doesn't even sound like him. The working title for this was In the Life of, which is very close. The combination of the two songs is brilliant, and yet they have really nothing to do with each other. Musically, they don't. Lyrically, they do, because if it's in a day in the life, and John's describing about his day in the life and the things that are going on. He read the newspaper, and it was an article about somebody getting a car crash, and somebody won the war, and I'd love to fill the holes in Blackburn, Lancashire, because there was an article in the newspaper about the roads needed repairing. The holes need to be filled. Okay, that's kind of like a day in the life. But Paul's little bit about woke up, fell out of bed, had to comb across my head, that's completely about a segment of what goes on in the beginning of your day in a life. Musically, how are you going to put those two things together? Mr. George Martin and Paul and his ideas, bringing in the 40-piece orchestra, and the idea of doing an orchestral glissando. Glissando where all the instruments are sliding up from their lowest note to their highest note possible. These are members of the London Symphony Orchestra. They play Beethoven. They play Mozart, Rachmaninoff. They play Tchaikovsky. Every note is printed out on the page. They thought that the Beatles had lost their minds. They thought that George Martin was a crazy man. But they did it. George Martin recorded the orchestra at least 2 times. So they're not playing exactly in sync with each other, which creates this chorus effect. So instead of it sounding like 40-piece orchestra, it sounds like an 80-piece orchestra. For this to be going on in 1967 in a rock and roll, quote-unquote rock and roll band, rock and roll album, no one in the world could have done this. No one didn't do it at the time. Earth-shattering, breaking new ground. The Beatles were listening to Stockhausen and Barrio, and they were even listening to John Cage, and these contemporary composers. So they had some ideas here and there to do things that were not within the rock idiom. Now, oh my God, what they did here, to this very day, cannot be done by anyone else. It's an absolute masterpiece. The piece stands up on its own. Does it belong on Pepper? Yes, I think it should be before the reprise. By the way, when they recorded the orchestra, it was a party atmosphere. You had Mick Jagger, Brian Jones, you had Marianne Faithfull, Keith Richards, Donovan was there, of course, George's wife, and even one of the Monkees was there, which is interesting, Mike Nesmith. So there was this party atmosphere. The Beatles were partying a lot. They even gave out like hats and costumes and false noses to the orchestra members. Now, again, these are some of the most conservative musicians in London. Some of them did it, some of them refused to participate. Then there's the ending chord. And the ending chord, you've got three pianos, and the chord is being played by John, Paul, Ringo, Mal Evans, and then George Martin is playing the harmonium. The ending chord is definitely John Cage influence because it goes on for 34 seconds or 43 seconds, something like that, one or the other. Sometimes I switch my numbers around. That's very Cagean, if you know anything about John Cage. Now, one of the things that I need to point out to the listeners, and this gets a little touchy, so you're going to have to forgive me. I've listened to these lyrics a million times. Nobody was really sure if he was from the house of what, Tom? What's the lyric?
Lords. House of Lords. No?
It's not Lords. No.
It sounds like it.
No, it doesn't sound like it. You think it says Lords because that's what's printed on the back of the album. You listen to it again. I have the isolated vocal tracks to this song of just John singing. He does not say Lords. He blew his mind out in the car. He didn't notice that the lights had changed. A crowd of people stood instead. Nobody was really sure if he was from the house of Fall, F-A-U-L. Fall is code nickname for Paul. This was all part of the Paul McCartney death hoax. They were planting the seeds, even on the Pepper album, of Paul McCartney dying in November of 66. Yeah, there's a ton of clues on this album. But this one is blatant. You could even listen to it without even the isolated track. Listen to it after we do this interview. He does not say Lords. There's no Lords. He doesn't say Lords. But in 1967, everybody heard Lords because we were looking at the lyrics on the back of the album while listening to the song. Of course he said Lords. It's printed. If it's printed, it has to be true. So that's a little thing I wanted to add to this. And then also the panning that they were doing now with stereo. It starts off with John's lead vocal to the right, and it moves to the center, and then it moves to the left, and then it moves around again. And then we get into, again, the ending. The ending is just, it's hard to describe. It's brilliant, it's creative, it's innovative, it's groundbreaking. It's utilizing elements of avant-garde composers that I've mentioned, combined with the brilliance and the creativity of the Beatles and George Martin. And that's what you have. Now, on the album, there was no, they call it the inner groove gibberish. No, there was none of that. Many years later, when I got the CD, I heard it. Now, what the hell are they saying? Do you know what they're saying, Tom?
No, not at all.
Again, it's all interpretive, and there's no right or wrong. It's whatever you perceive it to be. So I'm hearing, never could see any other way, never could see any other way, never could see any other way, or never could be any other way, never could be any other way, never could be any other way. So when you play it backwards, okay, it says the boogeyman is super dead. 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 And then, and then there's some laughter. This is all fun and games. The Beatles love to have fun, and they were having fun, and they were having fun with us. I did want to mention at the end of Within You and Without You, after all those profound lyrics, it ends with laughter. That was a surprise because of the serious nature of the lyrics and of the music and everything. But George wanted that. That was his call, because he wanted that to contrast with the seriousness of the piece, and he wanted to end it with some levity. And he also went one step further to say that, well, after all, there is an audience on this album, which is true. So he's bringing the audience back into the tracks on Pepper, because the last time we heard the audience was, of course, the first audience was the beginning, then the segue at the end of Pepper into With a Little Help from My Friends. So that's interesting to mention, that I wanted to bring that point into as well.
This album had no singles, and you'd think there'd be a single here or there. They released All You Need Is Love in July. 2.5 million albums were sold in the first 3 months of this. Did talk about it for a Grammy Album of the Year, Best Album Cover, Graphic Arts, Best Engineered Recording for Non-Classical, and Best Contemporary Album. So all well deserving. When you rank this, we said that for both of us, Revolver is number one. What would this be, number two, or how would you rank this?
This album is the most unique album in the Beatles catalog, because it's a standalone album, because of the production, because of the material, because of the time it was made, the time it was released, because of the Summer of Love. All of those things combined, which was going on with the social evolution and people doing drugs, and all of that going on, that this album cannot be compared to any other album in their entire catalog. It cannot be compared. So now with Pepper coming into play here, for today, I would put Sgt. Pepper first, then Revolver, then Rubber Soul, then Meet the Beatles, then the Beatles second, then A Hard Day's Night, then Help, then Magical Mystery Tour, then Introducing the Beatles, then Beatles 65, then Beatles 6, Yesterday, Today, and of course, last, Something New. That was absolute truth. I mean, Pepper, that was it. This blew all those other albums. They were gone. No one even thought about Yellow Submarine anymore. Are you kidding? But over time, Pepper would wear out. It would wear out. It didn't have the longevity of a Revolver or a Rubber Soul, because it's so specific to the summer of 1967, whereas Revolver was not specific to any time period. You could listen to Revolver in 1964, 1969, or 1976. Didn't matter. Pepper is summer 1967. So if you want to have a summer 1967 experience, you have to listen to Sgt. Pepper. Overall, sometimes it's like, all right, yeah, summer 67 was mind-blowing. It was one of the best times of my life, actually. Then Pepper is number one. But then when I compare it to Revolver and the great variety of songs and production on Revolver, then I say, oh, you know what? Yeah, Revolver's number one. So I go back and forth. It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to pin me down, brother.
I totally understand what you're saying. Like we see the artistry of this album. It's a given and it's a piece of art. But I'm looking at it as, okay, 50 years past, what do I pick up first? In the last 10 years or whatever, I would say Revolver's number one, and then Rubber Soul's number two for me, with Sgt. Pepper third. And then
right.
I know that you cast off Yesterday and Today, but that would be my fourth, Beatles second, Intro to the Beatles, Meet the Beatles, 6, Something New, and then we love our soundtracks, Help and A Hard Day's Night, round at the end.
Right.
Sgt. Pepper was great. It's a great, this is a great episode to, discuss the amazingness of it. And, it's weird that even Magical Mystery Tour is just coming up in a couple months. Just the outpour of creativity in 1 year, again with the Beatles. We talked about 64 and 65, 66, 67 doesn't discriminate on the high quality of music that they're producing at this point.
Yeah, well, that's very true. And of course, Magical Mystery Tour is next, and we'll get into that. But in terms of sound production, okay, there are some similarities between Magical Mystery Tour and Pepper, and yet at the same time, there's some differences. So things were starting to change as we get into Magical Mystery Tour. There's some carryover, though. That's what I'm saying. And we'll get into that when we do our next session.
Yep. So it is the Magical Mystery Tour. It's coming up. It's the Beatles Come to America. We have Brooke Halpin. The Beatle Guru knocks out Sgt. Pepper in a 2-hour marathon discussing the qualities of the album. And I said, I'm going to just stand back and let you run on this one. So you must be tired, and I appreciate you for doing it.
No, I'm excited. I'm all pumped up now. You're kidding me.
Yeah.
We're coming to take the audience away. We're coming to take your audience away, Tom, and that's what we're continue to do, hopefully.
There's one thing that, I had a question of that is related to the album is it's a 4-track. So the sound quality when they bump these tracks, so they would do the bass and drum together and then they would bump it together. So they're stuck with that. Like they can't go back and say, no, I think I like a different track. So they have to feel pretty comfortable about what they're going to keep and stay with it. I think that's pretty interesting right there. Like how did they do like a benefit for Mr. Kite with 4 tracks? That's crazy.
Okay. What you're referring to is something called pre-mixing. You have 4 tracks. So on track 1, you have, let's say, rhythm guitar and drums on track 1. On track 2, you have keyboards, piano, organs, harpsichord, harmoniums, whatever. So you mix down the guitar and the drums with the keyboards, okay? You mix on 1 and 2 down to track 3. They're mixed. Now, you're right. Whatever you do, baby, that's it. They're done. You can't go back and try to make something louder or softer. That's it. So the degree of expertise involved in doing that is paramount. Are you kidding me? Wow. Okay, so you mix the guitars and the drums and the keyboards down to 3. So now you have 3 tracks open, right? Then Mr. McCartney puts on the headphones and he listens to the guitars and the keyboards and the drums, and he lays down a separate bass track on track 1. The good news is that the bass is on a separate track. And when you listen to Pepper, and when you listen to the bass playing on Revolver, you can hear how prominent the bass is. You can hear those bass lines, those bass parts have to be on a separate track. So then you have 2 tracks open for vocals. Like you do all your vocals on track 2. You mix them down to track 3, which has, if you remember, the rhythm guitars, the keyboards, and the drums. Okay? So now you have 2 tracks open again.
What's interesting is like they've made a pact that they would never delete any of their material. So they had all the different tracks available so they can come back to it. It's almost like a surgeon where you're like, okay, well, I like take 7's bass, and I want to use that one. And I think we learned from the Anthology that George Martin was cutting and pasting different tracks together that we weren't aware of. A little of 1 and then a little 3. And
before you mix down, okay, to your point, track 1, guitars. Track 2, drums. Track 3, bass. Track 4, vocals. Now, you could take those 4 tracks, and if you don't mix them down, they exist. Well, you still have the individual tracks unmixed. That's what you're talking about. You have the 4 tracks unmixed. Now, if you take those 4 tracks and put them on a separate tape, then you have your 4 tracks open again, don't you? That's the other way of doing it, where you're not doing any pre-mixing. The way I was talking about before is you do the pre-mix to open up the other tracks. But as long as you have another 4-track machine, which I think at some point they did. They had more than one 4-track. They probably did.
Well, that makes more sense because I was like, wow, precision of, like they had just one 4-track. If they had multiple 4 tracks sitting there, then I would feel more comfortable because I was like, how how do they do that? And like now, what is a mixing board now? What like a 36 or
you have 64 tracks.
64, yeah.
Well, no, I mean with Pro Tools you could go on to that.
Yeah,
It's unlimited number of tracks. Yeah.
So it's wild. That technology that the album's technical, and just the fact that what they had to do with the mixing is pretty impressive too.
Oh, absolutely. But they were doing pre-mixing, as I mentioned. They were doing pre-mixing to open up tracks. That's one reason how they were able to, for instance, record the orchestra for the Day in the Life. They had to be listening to the playback of the piano and the bass and the drums that the Beatles had recorded. So George had to do some pre-mixing. And boy, I'll tell you, when you pre-mixed, that was it. You had to be so damn skilled. What a talent that is in and of itself.
And just one other comment: the Day in the Life, the video of you see on MTV once in a while, is stunning. Like the making of the song and the chaos and the editing of it, and just the who's in the studio.
The party atmosphere I talked about. It's a party.
It's a shame. It seems like that came after the fact. Like that wasn't a promo for the song at the time. It seems like someone cut that up afterwards, and we got that years later. I don't know if it's 1978 or not, but it's pretty wild. It's a great video.
It's like a whole movie almost.
Yeah, it's a shame because that what Magical Mystery Tour should be is just them doing songs, like videos of their songs. And stay away from the scripted stuff. Well, yes. Yeah, and we'll get into that big time on the next review that we do with Magical Mystery Tour, because Magical Mystery Tour, at its best, is a collection of music videos. Yeah, and that's, at its best. Yeah, I agree. And that's the way it should have been, and people would have loved it, and it would have never had any negativity. But, okay, that's how we're going to end this today. All right, we'll be talking to you soon. FYI, I love Magical Mystery Tour. Oh, even though it's a soundtrack album? It's a full album, and I'm totally fine with that. Okay. The movie is, I've never seen the movie, as far as I know. You have never seen the movie? Oh my God! I've seen bits and pieces of it. Okay, we got to save this conversation for once. I'm going to see if I can find it on YouTube. I mean, I saw all the videos, like Blue Jay Way and stuff. I've seen the music pieces, and I love that. I've seen the spaghetti thing. I've seen Singing on the Bus. Yeah, I don't know what else I'm missing. So it'd be nice to see. There are many times that I think they did an upgrade on the DVD about maybe 10 years ago. So there was an opportunity that I should have got the whole package, and I didn't do it. I have regrets in my life. All right, buddy. Well, I'll fill you in. Okay, no problem. All right. Okay. I'll talk to you later. Bye. Right, bye-bye. Next episode, The Beatles, The Magical Mystery Tour. Now enjoy an original Brooke Halpin composition, Liars.
Speak the truth, that's all there is. From someone's lips, from someone's kiss, I believe you laugh, you cry in a world where no one lies. La 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 lies, la 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 liars, la 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 lies, la 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 liars. One little word is all it takes. The code is broken, the whole world shakes. One person cheats, then tells a lie, sneaks around and ruins lives. La la doesn't take long, the lie is exposed eventually. La 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 lies. La 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 liars. La 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 lies. Convenient lies. The world has changed. It's so much worse. A cry and shame, a nasty curse. This side of the infectious lies rot the mind. Honest truth is hard to find. La 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 la. La 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 liars. 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 Which side of the truth? Which side of the liars? Which side of the truth? Which side of the truth? Which side of the liars? Liars, liars, liars.
End of episode.